Thank you very much for joining us today, Catherine.
Yes, hello, James. Thanks for having me. Happy World EV Day.
Happy World EV Day indeed. Thank you. So I have a question for you here. You mentioned that cities have the opportunity to influence and inspire the cities in the move towards vehicle electrification. What are the most inspiring programs that you've seen cities implement, and how have you seen people respond to it?
Yeah, and James, it's this opportunity that was actually the key driver when accepting this new role with the Bloomberg Philanthropies American Cities Climate Challenge and the City of Charlotte. So just to give you a little bit of background, the Climate Challenge is 25 cities that are doing just that, influencing and inspiring. Denver and Charlotte actually being two of those that you were hearing about today. So I'll certainly get to your core question on inspiring programs. I've got to acknowledge that first, that internal action is a key step to getting to these programs. You heard Mike and Sarah both talk about policies and budgets, and these cities in the Climate Challenge are quite frankly leading by example. And I believe that is one of, if not the most important things you can do as a city, is show your citizens that you are stepping up to the plate and truly working to do what you've said you're going to do, what you've committed to do. That's step one. And then step two is meeting your communities where they are, and then empowering them through education on these new technologies. Because let's be honest, we are all continuing to educate ourselves on these new technologies hourly as they continue to evolve hourly, and we make this just crazy critical transition to e-mobility. But I wanted to share a couple of examples of that step one that I mentioned that specifically are examples from right here within the city of Charlotte, and those tie back specifically to policy and budget. So, the city of Charlotte put their Strategic Energy Action Plan, which is also referred to affectionately as the SEAP, into place in December of 2018 after it was a unanimous vote by City Council, which was really awesome. And this plan calls for city fleets and facilities to be powered 100% by zero carbon sources by 2030, so 10 years. So earlier this year, in the heat of the COVID crisis, the social unrest that we had here in Charlotte, as I know many cities had in their backyards as well, storms and earthquakes, because yes, we had an earthquake in North Carolina, first time ever, or at least in 100 years, I think, something along those lines. The city, under the city manager, Marcus Jones's leadership, they signed into action its first ever AVL policy and its first ever sustainable and resilient fleet policy. So very similar to what Sarah was talking about, like in these policies, it's mandating that departments transition to electric using a TCO that we actually developed with the city to be able to justify why you're going to have that upfront expense be more expensive than your traditional fossil fuel powered vehicle. These two policies, they're setting the foundation for city fleets, and specifically the City of Charlotte's fleet, to make that transition to 100% electric over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
The city also approved a budget, again, in the heat of the COVID crisis and all of the other things going on, of $3 million for sustainable infrastructure. $1 million of that is going specifically to the purchase and installation of 38 additional level 2 charging stations, which is going to take the total number of city charging stations to 90. And the city also approved an additional $740,000, again, after utilizing that total cost of ownership to justify the investment, to transition 27 gasoline fueled vehicles to 87, which will leave the city of Charlotte with a total of 42 by next year. But I can't leave out the city's transit agency, who is just beginning and embarking on their first battery electric bus journey, with the piloting of 3 different OEM bus models to occur, and this is really important, on opportunity corridors soon. Because I think the other important thing to highlight, and what are some of the most inspiring programs, are programs that connect equity to the environment. But to finally get to answer your question, one of the most inspiring programs I've seen to date, and of course it happened in my Queen City, the city of Charlotte put on a quote unquote electric avenue last year as part of National Drive Electric Week. They partnered with their local utility, who is Duke Energy, various OEMs, and most importantly, their residents, to put on an EV education event on one of their main streets in Uptown that's typically only open for vehicle traffic. The event generated over 300 folks in attendance in just a partial day. And that was folks that were coming out and they wanted to learn about these EVs that were taking up the street where traditionally they'd see fossil fuel vehicles going up and down throughout the day. But even more interestingly enough, because our hope is to continue these events in our post-COVID world where we can be in person again, we did surveying. So we had 85 different in-person surveys. And these surveys, these engagements allowed us to better understand our community's thoughts and concerns. There are barriers per se or roadblocks on why they're not purchasing EVs or why they are purchasing EVs. So again, it's really an exciting opportunity to be able to work in cities because of the ability cities have to inspire and influence. And it's getting your house right first, right? It's the internal piece, which a lot of our cities within the challenge are doing from a policy and a budget and an ordinance standpoint. And then it's going out and it's educating the community and most importantly, meeting your community where they are, and just empowering them to know that they can do these things too. They can make these switches too, and here's how.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you very much, Catherine. We have some questions. Look, if any of the audience does have some questions for Catherine here, I think some of the things that she's saying are extremely inspiring, and because it really gets people to resonate with what the message that electric vehicles is all about. So the first question I have today here for you, do you think it's achievable that, perhaps 10 years is an achievable transition timeline to 100% electric? Or do you think that's, it's going to take longer than that? Or, what are you thinking? Maybe that's for public vehicles, citizens' vehicles may take longer. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the city of Charlotte made this goal knowing that the technology would be evolving, like I said before, on an hourly, daily basis. So, speaking specifically to our city, we fully feel that in 10 years we can be 100%, and we're going to operate in that capacity, right? We've committed to that, and we are going to go all in. And with Mayor Vi Lyles, and City Manager Jones, with their leadership, and the other leadership within the city standing behind these public goals that have been made, I think it's very capable. It's very realistic.
Now, I know you mentioned some of the public events that you've had in Charlotte, and what is the core message, or how have people really been able to grab that, I guess, in turn themselves? What are they saying to you about how they're being inspired?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Spending time with the community members, just going back to reference the event that happened last fall in Uptown Charlotte, the look on their faces when you explain to them how far you actually can go on one charge, or how safe the very back of a Tesla is, even though one may not think it's as safe as it could be. Just the light bulbs moments where they're looking at the cost comparisons and where they're thinking for the first time about total cost of ownership and what they'll pay all in, but more specifically, what they'll save. And then also what they'll save as it relates to carbon and greenhouse gas reductions, like providing equivalencies and making those equivalencies ingestible for someone who may not think about carbon and greenhouse gases and CO2 equivalent on a daily basis, like I tend to do on occasion. Just making it, again, meeting these folks where they are and really providing them the opportunity to learn more, because they'll listen. They're ready to listen, and they've told us they want more, they want to listen.
So here's a question. I know when I talk to my kids and their friends, that there's some resonance about electric vehicles that really resonates with them. Can you see what, as the last question today, what have you seen with kids, and how do they relate to that?
Oh my gosh, James, this is probably because you heard my kids on the last time we had a prep call. You know I have some familiarity with kids. And I, of course, am going to reference my 9-year-old son, who just yesterday was in the back seat, and we drove by a fossil fuel vehicle. And he said, "Mom, why are these cars not electric yet?" And I said, "Buddy, well, they just are. I don't know, Will." And he said, "Well, that's just not a good answer. Like, you should know the answer to this, and they should be electric vehicles." So with that, I will say that generation, they are watching us, and they are eager, and they want to learn too. So I would say not only is it an opportunity for cities to inspire and influence, but it's also a responsibility. But I would say it's a responsibility of all of us to ensure that they have the life that they deserve in the future.
Absolutely. And I think that's what it's all about. And it's really great to see, both kids and adults being inspired. So thank you so much today, Catherine. We're really happy to hear about some of the really important things that Charlotte has done and is doing. And we really wish you well in contributing to the future in Charlotte in that way. So thank you. We've got some questions for everyone between each other of the panelists. So I'm going to get Sarah to actually read her question out to Catherine this time on advice that she would give to cities starting out. Sarah, can you read that out for Catherine?
Yes, I'm just always interested, Catherine. You guys have done so much, and you're not a San Francisco or a New York, and so would just like to hear what advice you'd give to a city that's just getting started down this path to their fleet electrification or broader climate goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you made that point, because a lot of times when we have conversations with other cities, specifically cities on the West Coast, they often have that moment of, wow, what? 90 charging stations? You have a policy in place too? Like, it's, the jaw drops a little bit, and they can't believe that, I'm not going to say a small city, because it's definitely not, with 800,000 plus moving on a regular basis. But the Queen City is growing, and its electrification efforts are growing. And so the advice I would give to cities that are starting to build their program and start their program is, you got to make your first step. Make your first step. Make your first move. It could be a small move. It could be a huge move. But move. Don't just talk. And talking is good, don't get me wrong, but you have to move. There has to be action. And until you take that first step, you won't know, and you won't do. So that would be my greatest advice.
Thank you, Catherine. Mike has a question for Catherine about Duke Energy. So Mike, can you read that question out for Catherine?
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to, Catherine, if you could just kind of elaborate more. You briefly mentioned a pilot you're doing with Duke Energy and talk about opportunity corridors. I was wondering if you could just talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the city of Charlotte applied for the FTA's Low-No grant in 2019. We're unsuccessful in receiving funding in that year, but like the little engine that could applied again this year with a 50% match. So the city was awarded $3.7 million. With, again, a $3.7 million match, which was significantly higher than what they had done in 2019. However, what they also did this year that they did not do in 2019 was name a private procurement partner. And I'm not sure that I've heard of any other cities listing a utility as that private procurement partner, but Duke Energy has been publicly named and was written in the grant application as the procurement partner. And what the plan for Duke Energy is to actually procure 3 different OEM buses. So to be determined on what the OEMs are, but the hope and the goal is to be able to test those 6 buses the 3 different manufacturers on an identified opportunity corridor, which is where we need clean air the most, between our uptown area and the Charlotte Douglas International Airport, which actually if they have not received their buses, they're getting their electric buses pretty soon here. So.
Very cool. Thank you, Catherine. Now, one thing, I'm going to put you all on the spot. I want each of you to give like a very brief 1 second, a few words or 1 sentence summary of what you think, you know, the future of the cities is with electric vehicles. Catherine, what are your closing thoughts on cities with electric vehicles today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the future of cities is electric, but I'm most excited to continue seeing the intersection between not only sustainability, environmental issues and social issues, but electrification and equity, same thing, right? So, you know, the example that Mike gave us with the CARES funding going into low-income communities, like I am most hopeful for the shift, the potential shift to come and how we're thinking about electrification and how we connect it directly back to those communities that need it the most.